So we're going to move on and discuss the DHS funding bill that is advancing through Congress. This is the piece of legislation that will either prevent the government shutdown or push us to a government shutdown. It already went through the House. It passed by a vote of 220 to 207. I think I have it. I have it here. I'll pull it up I'll pull it up with 7 Democrats voting in favor of it. However, Chuck Schumer is saying that Senate Democrats are not going to pass this. He's saying that they are going to make sure that no Democrat in the Senate votes for this bill. The Republicans need 10 Democrats to jump on board for this bill to go through. I want to first discuss the House because it's an abomination that it even made it through the House of Representatives. We don't need woke ICE. We don't need ICE with body cams, with more robust training. We need to abolish ICE. That's the moderate position at this point. If we're having a discussion about this and you say anything less than abolish ICE, I'm going to excuse myself from this conversation. I'm going to excuse myself from that conversation because you are an unserious person. You are not ready to have a grown-up conversation where ICE is the actual fucking Gestapo as they are going around killing and terrorizing people in broad daylight. 7 Democrats voted to pass this bill. House passes DHS appropriations bill funding ICE in a 220 to 207 vote. 7 Democrats voted yes on this bill. Jared Golden, Marie Gluesenkamp Perez, Henry Cuellar, Tom Suozzi, Laura Gillen, Don Davis, and Vicente Gonzalez. 1 Republican voted no, that being Thomas Massie. I have extra beef with Laura Gillen and Tom Suozzi because they both represented at one point the district that I no longer live in on Long Island. At first it was Tom Suozzi and then it was Laura Gillen. They are some of the most cucked Democrats I have ever seen in my life. It doesn't get more centrist Democrat than Tom Suozzi and Laura Gillen. I was seeing ads for her campaign in 2024 or 2023, whenever it was, I can't remember. I was seeing ads for her campaign where she would talk about the need to have a strong border. You live in Nassau fucking County. You live in Mineola or Massapequa or wherever the fuck you live. What border are you worried about? What fucking border what fucking border are you campaigning on to secure? You're standing on a piece of rock in the middle of the Atlantic fucking Ocean. Spare me, man. Emma Vigeland, I believe it was Emma Vigeland, made a really astute observation here by pointing out that if these 7 Democrats did not vote for this bill would have not passed. It's so convenient how there's always just enough villainous Democrats to make sure that the death and destruction continues. Tom Suozzi, for some fucking reason, admitted that he should not have voted on this bill. He released a statement saying, quote, I failed to view the DHS funding vote as a referendum on the illegal and immoral conduct of ICE in Minneapolis. Tom Suozzi is a massive Israel dick rider, by the way, so I'm sure he wasn't thinking about the U.S. when he voted on this. He was thinking exclusively, about Israel. I hear the anger from many of my constituents, and I take responsibility for that. I have long been critical of ICE's unlawful behavior, and I must do a better job demonstrating that. If you guys are unaware, Long Island, much like the rest of downstate New York, has a tremendous immigrant population. Massive. There are towns on Long Island that ICE is explicitly targeting. There are a ton of both there are a ton of naturalized citizens, people with legal work permits here, and Tom Swazi can't fucking he doesn't know his own constituency. Like, is this a joke? Is this a joke? How fucking stupid do you think we are? And both Tom Swazi and Laura Gillen have at least one section in their district that is dense with immigrants. You are selling out your constituents to the fucking Gestapo. It's sickening for you to even it's sickening for you to vote on this, yes, but to then try to backtrack after the damage was already done, like, oh man, I wasn't thinking. This guy is having post-nut clarity on a fucking piece of legislation that is going to make life for his constituents much more hazardous. He continues. The senseless and tragic murder of Alex Preddy underscores what happens when untrained federal agents operate without accountability. President Trump must immediately end Operation Metro Surge and ICE's occupation of Minneapolis that has sown chaos, led to tragedy, and undermined experienced local law enforcement. On the other end of the aisle, Laura Gillen defends the DHS vote, saying that it imposed important guardrails on ICE. She says ICE would have kept operating because of Trump's mega bill, but without mentioning Minnesota, she adds that Nome needs to go and that DHS needs to be held accountable. Laura Gillen released this statement from her office in Hempstead, New York, which, as I'm sure you can probably foresee me saying, has a tremendous immigrant population. Like, I've been to Hempstead. I got married at the Hempstead courthouse. Like, I've been to these places. I know what the population makeup is. How are you going to represent this district and still sell out your constituents? It makes me fucking sick. She says, last week, I voted to fund essential disaster relief and local and national security efforts to keep our communities safe. The bill also included important guardrails for ICE, including body cameras and increased de-escalation training. De-escalation training hasn't worked for regular law enforcement who receive more training than ICE. Why do you think that it is going to work for ICE? Opposing it would have cut off funds to FEMA, TSA, and the Coast Guard while allowing ICE to continue operating under the status quo because of a previous $75 billion windfall from Republicans in Congress. So let them blow through that money. Who gives a fuck? However, I believe we must go further. To restore order and accountability at DHS and guarantee safety in our communities, Secretary Nome must be impeached. The tragic killings of Americans by federal agents make it clear that Nome's removal from office is urgent and necessary. She's fucking stupid. It's not going to change anything. The agency is still going to behave as it fucking wants to. You take Kristi Noem out of there and replace her with some other fucking dick rider, some other white nationalist dipshit, the same things are going to happen. I have this article here from PBS. Funding deal begins to unravel as Senate Democrats vow to oppose DHS bill over Alex Preddy's shooting in Minnesota. Democratic senators are vowing to oppose a funding bill for DHS following the shooting death of a 37-year-old Minnesota man, a stand that increases the prospect of a partial government shutdown by end of week. Chuck Schumer, in a social media post after the Saturday shooting, said that what is happening in Minnesota is quote unquote appalling, and that Democrats quote will not provide the votes to proceed to the appropriations bill if the DHS funding bill is included. 6 of the 12 annual spending bills for the current budget year have been signed into law by President Trump. 6 more are awaiting action in the Senate. Despite a revolt from House Democrats and mounting calls for Secretary Noem's impeachment, if senators fail to act by midnight Friday, funding for Homeland Security and other agents covered under the bills will lapse. Quote, Democrats sought common sense reforms in the DHS spending bill, but because of Republicans' refusal to stand up to President Trump, the DHS bill is woefully inadequate to rein in the abuses of ICE. The White House reached out to Senate Democrats late Sunday, as have Republicans, according to a Senate Democratic leadership aide who insisted on anonymity. but they have not yet raised any realistic solutions, the aide said. Republicans will need some Democrat support to pass the remaining spending bill in time to avoid a partial shutdown. The support was already in question after Renee Good, a mother of three, was fatally shot and killed earlier this month by an ICE agent in Minneapolis, but the fatal shooting Saturday of Alex Preddy, an ICU nurse, quickly prompted Democrats to take a more forceful stand. On Sunday, House and Senate Democrats convened separate conference calls as they privately assess next steps and press to restrain the Trump administration's immigration enforcement operations. Washington Senator Patty Murray, the top Democrat on the Senate Appropriations Committee and key negotiator on the funding package, had been pushing her colleagues to vote for the Homeland Security bill, arguing that Democrats had successfully fought off major increases to ICE's budget. But in the wake of the shooting, Murray said on Sunday that, quote, "I will not support the DHS bill as it stands. Federal agents cannot murder people in broad daylight and face zero consequences." Federal officials have defended the actions of the agents involved in the Good and Preddy shootings as justified. Democrats said video released of both shootings showed otherwise. Republicans are increasingly challenged, with some calling for thorough investigations, while others stand with federal officials. The events in Minneapolis are deeply disturbing, said Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana on Twitter. The credibility of ICE and DHS are at stake. There must be a full joint federal and state investigation. We can trust the American people with the truth. Tom Tillis, who is retiring because he's a bitch, quote, wants a thorough and impartial investigation into the shooting, and said any administration official who rushes to judgment and tries to shut down an investigation before it begins are doing an incredible disservice to the nation and Trump's legacy. I called Tom Tillis a bitch not because he's retiring, but the reason why he's retiring. Tom Tillis he got bullied by Trump online like once or twice and now doesn't want to do it anymore. Instead of standing up to fucking Hitler too, he's just going to retire to his North Carolina estate. Lindsey Graham said Democrats should reconsider their threat to not support DHS funding and work with him to, quote, end the mess created by sanctuary city policies. Now is not the time to defund one of our major national security priorities, border protection. Growing backlash from Democrats put Republican leaders in a difficult position. Much of the government, including the DoD, continues to operate on a short-term bill that provides funding through Friday. Republican leaders had hoped to avoid another shutdown after last fall's 43-day closure that revolved around Democrats' insistence on extending federal subsidies that make health coverage more affordable for those enrolled in the ACA marketplace. Before Preddy's death, many Democrats felt the same way about a potential shutdown, lending support in the House to most of the remaining appropriations bills, with DHS the exception. House Democrats largely rejected the Homeland Security portion last week, with just a handful joining Republicans to ensure its passage. More than 100 Democrats called for Noem's impeachment. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here and just see if there's anything else worth mentioning in this article. No, there is not. Now, the Democrats, I don't believe, I'm going to be cynical here. Let me be cynical, please. It's the only thing I have. I don't think some Democrats are doing this out of the goodness of their heart. There are certainly Democrats in Congress who voted no or will vote no on these bills because they genuinely believe that ICE needs to be abolished. They genuinely despise what immigration authorities are doing. But there are also definitely at least a handful of Democrats who are only standing up against this bill or vowing not to vote for this bill because they see where the winds are blowing, because they're following their political instincts. David Sirota points this out in a piece for the Lever, his publication. Of course, as persistent as Democrats' pro-ICE faction remains, it is possible we've reached a long overdue turning point. Amid mass protests in the hours after ICE's killing of Alex Preddy, Senate Democrats vowed to block the ICE funding bill that 7 of their party's House members helped Republicans ram through the House. Rejecting his party's old game of pretend powerlessness, Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts admitted the truth. Quote, we have the power to end this. This abrupt shift didn't happen because Senate Democrats suddenly grew a conscience and found a moral compass. It happened because most Democratic politicians are weather vanes, and public outrage is, for now, a gale force wind. In other words, David Sirota and myself are assuming that Democrats are just seeing how unpopular ICE is right now. They see how voting to perpetuate this is political suicide at this point. The people are fed the fuck up. The people are angry. We are angry. We want the opposition party to operate as that. And Democrats are recognizing that if they don't, they're likely to be primaried and voted out of office. They are seeing where the wind is blowing and they are following it. Now, David Dayen wrote in the Prospect talking about some of the conditions in this bill. Here's our report from inside the Senate Democratic Caucus, where the strategy to block DHS funding is set and the list of demands is expanding. They include an independent federal state investigation, which includes Minnesota officials of ICE murders and tactics, a ban on ICE use of face masks, a requirement of body cameras, a ban on roving ICE patrols, a ban on the invented category of administrative warrants that bypass judges in violation of the Fourth Amendment, and end to arrest quotas. I still believe that the only way to protect the American people is to abolish ICE. With that being said, there are some things that I believe that are pointed out by David Dayen that are quality steps in the interim. Arrest quotas, face masks are arrest quotas and face masks embolden ICE agents. The face masks afford them anonymity, of course, despite the fact that they are public employees and their information is public anyway. Their names and badge numbers are public anyway. And the arrest quotas as well. ICE is supposed to arrest 3,000 people a day. 3,000 people a day. And that's why there are so many innocent people being picked up. That's why naturalized and natural born U.S. citizens are being picked up. That's why people with a Spanish accent are being picked up despite the fact that they are citizens. Those are quality steps. The body cams are fucking stupid because ICE would just turn them off anyway. Administrative warrants, obviously, those don't have any. Those are invalid legally anyway in the avenue of what ICE is doing. So a ban on them doesn't mean anything unless there's an enforcement mechanism. That's the thing. These people need consequences. It's not just investigating ICE's murders. It's prosecuting and jailing the people who commit these murders. It's not just about banning administrative warrants. It is about prosecuting and jailing those who kidnap people within the United States of America using an administrative warrant as the justification. An administrative warrant does not allow you to go into somebody's home and detain them. It needs to be a judicial warrant signed by a judge. An administrative warrant is signed by a fucking ICE agent. There are some good things in here. I want to make that clear. But ultimately, none of these go far enough. ICE must be abolished if our elected officials sincerely care about keeping us safe.